All right, today we've got another great guest to the podcast. Like we said off the top of the show, his name is Coach Koe. You've seen him in all of your socials, I'm sure, because he is one of the most consistent hobby content creators out there. You can find him on Instagram at Coach Koe Collectibles, where he has thousands of followers. He's got his own podcast where he's interviewed several big names in the hobby, and he's traveled to a bunch of shows, producing even more content, including at the most recent Topps Hobby Rip Night, where he shared the same stage as Mr. Tom Brady. You might have heard of him. I definitely want to talk about that experience, but without further ado, Coach Koe, welcome to the podcast.
Clark, man, thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you. We also mentioned at the top of the show, you're a fellow Canadian, so always great to have more representation from the North in the hobby. As far as Canadian content creators go, we've had Jeremy Lee on the program, so we're excited to talk to you, Coach Koe, today.
Amazing.
So first, we'd like to ask this question for all our guests. Can you start by giving us your story about how you got into the hobby?
Yeah, of course. So, like a lot of people, the story runs, fairly far back.
Okay.
I would say that my first introduction to the hobby was with Pokemon and actually, yeah, I'd say Pokemon cards.
Oh, interesting.
From like an actual card perspective. If we're talking sports cards, that was maybe a little bit further along. I would say I was maybe 10 or 11. And so I grew up in a predominantly Portuguese and Italian neighborhood. I'm Portuguese myself.
Okay.
And so the Euro and the World Cup were like a big deal for us. And so every one of these big tournaments, we'd go to our local convenience store and we buy the packs of stickers. I think they came with like 5 or 6 stickers in a pack. We buy those books, and the goal was to complete that book essentially like before the end of the tournament. And after buying enough packs of stickers and you have some doubles and you really down to like the last few, fortunately we had a pop-up. I don't even want to call it a show. It was like at the back of a mall. It's called the Galleria Mall.
Okay.
And you'd go and there'd be all types of sports cards and TCG and memorabilia. There's a very, very small show set up every Saturday from, I think it was like 10 to 5. And that's where you would go to buy the individual stickers to complete your book. So I've completed a few of those books.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think Pokemon was probably my first introduction to like cards. And then from the sports cards perspective, it was definitely soccer stickers. Right. It later transitioned into like McDonald's packs of hockey cards, Tim Hortons hockey cards. So for people who are listening who aren't from Canada, like you probably have no idea what the hell we're talking about.
Right.
But they were like, it was a cheap way to get introduced to the hobby, right? It was they were like dollar packs. Yeah. It was something very easy for my parents to stomach because they didn't want to put a ton of money into this like dinky little thing for kids.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a ton of value, but because of that, like a lot of the stuff that I grew up collecting was about like completing the set. Like for me, completing the set was everything. There were still like case hits, quote unquote. Like I distinctly remember in Tim Hortons hockey cards, there was like clear cuts, and they were like one in every like 10,000 packs. And those were, if you hit one of those, it was like a big deal. I wasn't concerned with the value of them, just completing the set.
Yeah. And
so like I come predominantly from like a set collecting background. And then like I said, like TCG was like it was like having the best stuff and what works, what doesn't work, continually building off that like core deck or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But man, that's kind of like my origin story. Yeah.
No, I don't know why, but I never took you as a set collector, so that surprised me. And you just talking about sticker books. That brings me way back to I did the same thing with hockey with the Panini hockey sticker books, and same thing. You get to the last few, and there's moments where you just open the pack and they're all doubles.
There's a lot of moments like that, especially like towards the end. You're like, and then it becomes like, what am I doing, right? Like I can't keep opening packs. Like I'd rather just buy the thing, even if it's like 5 or 10 times what a pack would be.
Yeah.
I've just ripped 15 packs in order to try to get that one card anyway.
True, exactly. I what I ended up doing was you can actually write Like back in the day, you write mail to them,
Yeah.
and then they deliver it back to you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
how I actually completed the set. But
I love that.
but yeah, well, we talked about being fellow Canadian collectors, and you talked about Tim Hortons cards. Obviously, we're big into hockey cards as well. And I just saw your interview. I know it's recorded of several months ago, but the one you did with the Chase, David
Yeah.
Adams, the Chase, and you talked about something that we actually totally agree on, which is that hockey cards, compared to other sports cards, has a ways to grow in regards to collectability, right? For example, while we complain, or I complain, about there being just too many parallels in baseball card and basketball card sets, the opposite is kind of true for hockey cards, where you just don't see that many parallels, that means that there's no real chase factor or excitement or buzz.
Yeah.
Until recently, of course.
I'm like, imagine that, right? Like it's
Yeah,
very different now with Connor Bedard, and I mean
exactly.
they've added outburst parallels, they added the red outburst, they
Hmm.
added a deluxe even. So like completing a rainbow has never been more fun, I think, for hockey card collectors.
Agree, 100%. So yeah, I just want to get your general thoughts on just the collectability of hockey cards now in general. And I know you've gone to shows in the States, and I
Yeah.
asked this similar question to Jeremy when he was on the pod. Um, do you see more interest in hockey cards within the American population, or is that still early stages?
Yeah, so I was fortunately at the Philly card show this
Hmm.
past weekend,
Yep.
and Philly is they have like a pretty good hockey town. They have like Jersey's not very far. You've got like New
Right.
York is not very far either, which are all pretty big hockey markets.
Yeah.
And so I saw more hockey at a US show than I have in a very long time. Like I
Oh,
felt very much at
interesting.
home there. I saw dollar boxes like for like hockey cards, and I was just
No
having an
way.
absolute blast. And then on top of that, like they have, I mean, we had the Connor Bedard hype last weekend, right? So
Hmm.
from what I saw last weekend, it was hockey was the most popular it's ever been. There were many people going around from table to table asking for Connor Bedard's,
That's cool.
um, and it was a pretty surreal experience. And like if we're talking like collectability in the hockey market, obviously so much has changed since that interview with the Chase.
Yeah.
um, you know, like I said previously, the rainbows have expanded dramatically. Where like you've got your usual clear cuts, and you've got your usual.
Right.
Actually, it's not even usual like that. Even the clear cut came 2016, right? So
Yeah.
Upper Deck
Yeah.
is continuing to add different parallels. I think we're up to like 8 or 9 if we include like the jumbo in there,
Hmm.
of variations for a young gun. And I think that it's going to be a lot of fun, if you go outside of the Bedard. I mean, it depends on what your bankroll is, but
Right.
if you have a guy that you're PCing in like this set or an upcoming set, it's probably never been more fun to chase the 1 of 1, chase the out of 25 outburst,
Sure.
chase yeah, like the deluxe. Like there's just so many different options now.
Yeah. No, agreed. Kind of a follow up to that. Do you think we'll get to the point where we're like, maybe there's too many parallels now? Like the Panini Select we've talked about in a previous podcast episode, where if you're a football card collector or even a basketball collector, the Select, we just lost track of how many parallels there are. Do you think we'll get to that point, or are you not worried about that?
That's a good question. I think there's people that are already pissed off with how many parallels there are, to be
Sure.
honest. Like I think that it's like a yin and a yang almost. You know what I mean?
Mm.
There's always going to be like opposing, I guess, like points of view,
Yeah.
and ultimately the market will decide, what it likes, right? If there's too
That's
many
fair.
parallels, I'm sure they'll scale back. If there aren't enough parallels, I'm sure they're going to want to add more.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that the hockey is a very, very like it's not even close to baseball or basketball or even
Hmm.
football.
Sure.
So I think for the time being, it's been a nice little addition, and I hope they don't go too crazy. And I mean, I think anything less than 15, I think is probably good. Like at the minute you start coming over 15, it's like all right, like
Sure.
enough is enough almost.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that too. we talked about Connor Bedard Mania, of course, with the Upper Deck Series 2 being released just last week. Um, what do you think it's done in terms of like not just American, but like just collectors in general, in terms of like getting people interested in hockey cards? Do you think it's a first step towards getting people more interested in hockey cards in general, or do you think this is just like a Connor Bedard thing, with the one of one $1 million bounty by David Adams? Do you think it's specific to Connor Bedard, or do you think this is kind of a good sign for hockey card collectors in the future?
Yeah, so fortunately, I actually had a conversation like just like this with
Okay,
Josh Madigan over at Hockey Cards Gong Show. A shout out Josh and Hockey Cards Gong Show.
nice.
Um, it's funny. I think this all started with Laffy. I think that
Okay,
during the pandemic, more people ripped hockey than probably ever before because all the other products were inaccessible, and hockey was very cheap in
yep,
comparison to basketball and football.
true.
And so I know a lot of Americans and people who were not necessarily into hockey cards that were ripping was it 2020 series 1, I think it was,
Yep,
for Laffy. And I remember his young gun being, kind of where Bedard is now, so like the 300 range.
right.
Um and it just never really panned out. But I saw this hype before, so I think that this was a natural progression when we had a guy who was actually playing to his potential. Like I
Yeah.
think Connor Bedard this season already has more points than Laffy had at any point in a previous season.
Hmm.
And so he also just had like 5 points in 2 games, which again, just like all it's doing is
Amazing.
like padding
Yeah,
the lure. You know what I mean? Like
the
the
hype. Yeah, for sure.
exactly. So but I do think that a lot of these people are in for just Connor Bedard. Like, I don't know if that money is going to
Fair.
get translated into other players. I think maybe during playoffs, and this is like another thing that I talked about, is like a month from now, Connor Bedard will be pretty much irrelevant.
Hmm.
Like, in terms of like from a playing hockey on a day-to-day basis,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
those those people that might be tuning into the NHL for the first time to watch him because maybe they pulled his card and he's doing great things. Like I said, 5 points in the last 2 games. But come playoff time, his Blackhawks are not going to be there,
Yeah.
and they're not going to play again until November, right?
Well. Right.
October, whatever it is.
Yep.
So he's going to become pretty irrelevant. So I think that the one thing that we can hope for as people who collect hockey cards would be that people have the interest in hockey now and they follow along for the playoffs, because I've also heard multiple people tell me that like hockey is the best game to watch like live, for instance.
Yeah.
And so, and these are people who don't even really like know anything about the NHL, but they're like, I'll tell you one thing, like hockey's the best sport to watch live. And I'm like,
Right.
I love that.
Yeah. For
So
sure.
I mean, hopefully that translates into like more higher viewership for playoffs, and naturally higher viewership means that some players that might not be watched every day. So maybe some guys from the West Coast, or guys on like a Carolina or a Boston, or
Yeah.
that they start to get some hype. And we see these swings during the playoffs. Like I mean, Matthew Tkachuk last year went on a parabolic run.
Right.
And
Yeah.
he plays for Florida, and no one really gives a shit about Florida, right? So
Right.
there's always going to be stuff like this. I think that with the interest in Bedard, we're probably going to see maybe a little bit more volatility
Mm.
during the playoffs. But I think it'd be most interesting to see what happens to Connor Bedard's cards in like October, November next year.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. Yeah. And everything you mentioned made sense for sure. And I hope it translates, even if it's like a few percentage points to to people really appreciating hockey. I still think that it's a really well, this might sound crazy to some people, or Canadians certainly, but I feel like Connor McDavid's undervalued.
I
We talk about generational players, like
Sidney
he is one of them.
Crosby. Sidney Crosby is
Crosby,
like,
another good one.
it's
Yeah,
criminal. It's like legitimately, the guy's won 3 Stanley Cups, I think, and like
yeah, Captain
he's
Canada.
you cannot have the 2000s generation of players without Sidney Crosby, right? Like,
Yeah,
so I think he's criminally undervalued. And like, even if you like look his stuff up side by side with Connor McDavid, like I know Connor McDavid has a ton of individual accolades, but like
yeah,
Sidney Crosby came back from multiple concussions, bro, and like he's on pace to score, I think, the most goals he's scored in like 10, 15 years. Like the guy's just not normal. Like people thought after Matt Cook hit him, he was done.
Yeah, right.
And this was during the time of like no one knew anything about concussions. I mean, they still don't, but like he was the poster boy for concussions, right?
Yeah,
like,
true.
And I just don't think we understand, like we truly appreciate like Sidney Crosby. And so I agree. I think Sidney Crosby's too cheap. I think Connor McDavid's probably too cheap, especially if you're throwing that kind of money around for Connor Bedard, right? Like I think guys like Mikko Rantanen are too cheap. Like Braden Point is too cheap. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of guys where if we start naming off like who's too cheap, like I'm gonna go on a rampage.
this episode will be too long.
Yeah, I'm gonna go on an absolute heater. Like how is Brock Faber's cards the same price as like
it's crazy.
Victor Hedman. I was like, what are we talking about over here?
It's crazy. Well, one of my co-hosts, John, who's a big Crosby guy, he's saving up for like one of the SP Authentic Future Watch models. So he probably wants us to stop talking about him so he can still afford it a year down the line. But yeah, Crosby definitely criminally undervalued, as you say. Totally agree with that. All right, I want to speak about Top's Hobby Rib Night, right? That you attend at Citi Field, home of the New York Mets. I've been there to watch a game. Actually, I'm also a big time baseball card. I would actually say I'm more of a baseball card collector. Funny enough, still being Canadian. Maybe it was because of the Blue Jays' success in 92-93. You know, I was right in the middle of that, so that got me excited. But I've been to Citi Field, beautiful ballpark, and you were there recently, of course, for Top's Hobby Rib Night. I want to know how that came together. You know, in terms of like what got you there, and you know, even being able to share the same stage with Tom Brady, that interaction. Yeah, just curious to see how you got to that point. It was cool to see.
Yeah, it was it was kind of like one of those moments where like everything just kind of came together. I had developed a relationship, and I still have like I have some relationships with shops in the United States through like a lot of my travels and just like meeting really good people. And one of them happens to be Al from Skybox. Shout out Skybox Collectibles, and they're out in Connecticut, and he was already doing Top's Hobby Rip Night at Citi Field. They had chosen Citi Field despite the fact that it was about an hour away from their hub, which is in Connecticut. Just because they thought that a bigger venue and would be more fun for, you know, other members of the community who might not get the opportunity to come out to Connecticut and kind of see what they're all about. And the original plan was to have Dylan Harper there, who's one of the top college prospects, or top high school prospects in the country for basketball. And so we were already talking about me coming down and helping with some of the content creation side, just to make sure that everyone knew what was going on and that there was an accurate representation of like what was happening there.
Sure.
And I obliged. I was like super excited to do so. And then probably about 3 or 4 days, I would say 4 days out, he called me and he said that Tops had contacted him and said that Tom Brady was coming.
Okay.
And
wow.
And I was like, well, I mean, I was already coming before, so like I'm definitely coming now.
Yeah.
And again, like the original plan was to just like come in and like create content and just like be there and which was awesome. And they had brought in Alex Jaimo to do a lot of the emceeing. So I was like, oh, this is fantastic. And there was a few opportunities that arose where, you know, they actually wanted the second person on the microphone, and so they were like, hey, like, do you want access to this? And I was like, well, yeah, of course I do. You know, like, this is a crazy moment. So I really just kind of took the mic and ran with it.
Nice.
And so we ended up putting it on for Tom Brady. It was, and more importantly, for the community. There were so many kids that showed up, and that's what like the Hobby Rep Nights are all about. It was amazing. When he first got there, they told us that he wasn't going to sign anything and there wasn't going to be any pictures, and we were obviously okay with that.
Sure.
But you know, as the night progressed, and he was only there for probably like 30 minutes, but he was signing like everything for these kids, and it was just like watching these kids light up was just unbelievable. And some of the trades he was making, like he was trading base cards for like their base cards for like Tatum RPAs, and
Oh my
like
gosh.
it was
Yeah,
honestly like
that's
I
awesome.
was like, this is incredible. Like this kid just got like a $1,100 worth of
Right.
stuff for a base card of I don't know, like Jordan Alvarez or something.
Yeah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
But
That's
again, like that's kind
amazing.
of what it's all about, right? Like it's like,
Sure.
putting cards into the hands of these kids, and starting their collections off. And so much of the hobby has become like, let's say, like unsustainable for the average person,
Mm,
and especially when it comes to like from a family perspective.
right.
Yeah, box prices, especially with flagship stuff, are not as high as some of the premium products, and still
Hmm.
somewhat affordable. But I look to the way that I started with hockey cards, and like I just told you that I was buying McDonald's packs and Tim Hortons packs, because like
Mm,
that's all my parents were willing to kind of contribute.
yeah.
And so, this was the kind of like one of these moments for these kids where, you might normally get those Topps Big League, or,
Hmm.
maybe like a hanger box for a special occasion, but like you just inherited from Tom Brady, like a
Yeah.
$1,200 card, right? So,
Yeah.
and that's like a moment that these kids are never going to forget, I'm sure. So yeah, that's kind of how it all came together. And
Yeah.
it
It's
was,
awesome.
it was pretty surreal, truthfully.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. And yeah, like to your point, even more than the card that the kid was getting, I'm sure the experience of getting it from Tom Brady is the bigger thing. You know what I mean? Like that's a story to
100%.
tell all your friends growing up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had like dads come up to be like, my life has changed because like
Right.
my kid got to trade with Tom Brady. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Like, and I'm like,
Amazing.
that's unbelievable. Like that is gonna be telling the story about his kid at every
Yeah.
party he goes to. You know
Exactly.
what I mean? Like, watch out for
For sure.
Christmas, because like that's his opener. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was great. It was awesome.
Totally. Amazing. Well, it's kind of a segue to my next question. With Topps Hobby Rib Night, of course, it's Fanatics that's been involved and doing a lot of the marketing in the hobby space. I know you're at the Philly show this past week, and Michael Rubin was there. I saw that on social. I saw that you were able to meet up with him, and he's famously says he wants to 10x the hobby. How do you think things have gone so far ever since Fanatics really took over, really came into the hobby space?
I think from a marketing perspective, it's been unbelievable. I think
Mm,
that more people are talking about sports cars now than probably ever before.
agreed.
Um, it's just like from the creative decisions that are making for some of the commercials, like the Tom Brady Bowman commercial that was aired, I think, on
Yeah.
actual television. Um, just seeing some of the partnerships take place with like MLB, and the pushes from like players to start their own collections,
Yeah.
and to have Randy Johnson's got his own like photograph cards now. Like
Yeah.
it's like whatever that the Kevin Hart situation with like the tiny Kevin Hart on some of the
Yeah, that's cool too.
Phillies
Yeah.
cards.
Yeah.
Like there's just so many talking points, and I think that is kind of what you want
Hmm.
if you want to market to everyday people.
Yeah.
Like I think he's making cards cool. Kevin O'Leary was ripping a box of cards literally like 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like there's interest, like there's a lot of interest, and it's some of that interest doesn't necessarily have to do with dollar figures, right? Like,
Hmm.
I mean, I know that we get told bounties and all this other stuff, but I think a lot of people are just kind of intrigued by maybe this hobby, and how it's been able to go undetected for a long time, man. Like,
Sure.
and so I'll say that about the marketing. Now, when it comes to like some of the other things, like the quality control, I mean, there's been a few times where they just haven't gotten it right yet. Like they missed the stamping on the
First
first
card.
card, right? And
Yeah.
that was like an advertised parallel. And so they really kind of missed the boat on that one, I think. They printed the two superfractors back with Bowman
Hmm.
2023.
Yeah.
So I think that also was like kind of the ball was dropped there. So there's definitely a lot of room for improvement.
Sure.
But I think that their heart's in the right place. As long
Hmm.
as prices don't go nuts, I like where things are right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people that listen to the podcast, this is season 4 for us. So we've been doing it for about 3+ years on a weekly basis. And we've seen it where it has come from, even though within the 2021 hobby hype into where it is now with things settling down. But we've always really appreciated what Fanatics has done for the hobby, and we agree with you in terms of like people talking more about sports card. That's certainly gone up, and in terms of since ever since Fanatics came into play. And the thing about quality control issues, I feel like there's always been quality control issues in the hobby, but there seems to be a little bit, at least more accountability. Right?
Yeah.
Fanatics has owned up to some of those mistakes. Paying bounties for those double superfractors.
I mean, they did. They paid bounties for superfractors. They offered that for like 6 months. They also, I mean, they immediately came out and said, like, we didn't stamp these. Like, if you find one that hasn't been stamped, send it to us. We will personally stamp it, and we'll give you a rebate of some kind, right? So, for sure. I think that like they've definitely corrected these mistakes. Like, the next step is to just like kind of not have them happen, though, right?
Right.
I mean, those are both pretty big things, like truthfully, like, and they're both related to one of ones, and one of ones are usually pretty big chases in products. So, I think, I think that there's definitely room for improvement. And I mean, if you guys follow my content and you follow my content, like I'm always gonna say there's a good side and a bad side, and it's like we need to fall somewhere in between.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to sit here and just be like, oh yeah, they've been amazing, and then there's nothing wrong. Like there's definitely been problems, but like I hope that they get fixed.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I like your content, because you do call people out when they need to be called, and like I said in the introduction, you dig up a lot of hobby news. Like sometimes I hear news about the hobby from you because you were able to surface it, and then everyone has their own takes on it. So that's kind of been really useful for us in terms of finding news about the hobby. So appreciate the work that you do.
I appreciate that you telling me that, man. That means a lot to me.
Yeah, and and this is my last question before we get into a rapid fire segment. But I can see from your background you're also into fitness and which I'm sure takes some of your time as well. So I'm wondering, for other aspiring content creators out there, how do you manage to consistently produce the hobby content, coming up with all the different videos and the reels, while balancing your time with what you do outside of the hobby?
That's a great question. I think that it's really easy when you find stuff that you're passionate about. Nice. And I think I've worked really hard to create a life where I really don't do anything that I haven't chosen to do. Right. Mm-hmm. And I guess we all make choices every day, but I know exactly, like there are times where I'm exhausted and I don't want to make content, for instance, or like I maybe don't want to work out or don't want to do something, but I'm like, well, I have to, because this is what, like, I might not want this right now, but I want to build this momentum. I want to continue to provide for the community. I want to. So I think that I also think balance is subjective. I think that you kind of have to make time, right? Yeah. Like it's not always going to be like, oh, I'm going to omit something. Like sometimes you just have to add, and eventually it gets easier, right? Like I know for myself, like my workday starts at like 5:30, and so in order for me to make content, like I have to make content before that. Right? So like I mean I could sleep in, or I could just like build that content side, right? So I think that once you understand why you do what you do, it's really easy to make the choice, even if it's hard. And in fact, like making the hard choice is often the best choice, because you really kind of figure out what you're made of. And yeah, man, I'm all about just pushing yourself and finding fulfillment. And so I just think once it's very easy to keep pushing.
Yeah. Nice. Great advice. And I totally agree with you about balance being subjective, because I've run into people, like when I talk about what I do, similar to you in terms of hobby content creation, but they think there's one right answer. It's like, no, it's whatever you can give. For me, when I had I used to be a journalist, and then I used to be a digital marketer, and you have your 9 to 5 at the time. And then I just did my hobby content from 9 p.m. to 2 in the morning, because that's what I want to give. And, to get to a certain point, you just have to be committed to that. And for others, they need that sleep. That's fine too. But just kind of pushing your own boundaries. I think that's great advice.
You're just never going to be like, you're not going to be able to do something different unless you do something different. Right. Like, so like,
right.
And if you want a different life than everybody else, then you have to choose different things than everybody else. So like
Yeah.
I would say that like if you're someone who has to put in that like 9 to 2 after putting in a 9 to 5, again, like if as long as you know what you're doing, like in terms of like I thoroughly enjoy talking about this, or I thoroughly enjoy the content creation perspective or aspect of it,
Yeah.
then it's a lot easier to like, okay, one more day, right? And eventually you actually get way more efficient at like from like 9 to 5, it's like now it's 9 to, or sorry, instead of like 9 to 2, it's like 9 to 12 and 9 to 11:30.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's like you can actually shorten the amount of time by continuing to improve. So it's the beginning is always gonna be the hardest part. When I tell people all the time, when it comes to creating content or starting anything, the hardest part is just starting. Like stop overthinking it, stop looking and gathering more information and any of this. Like just start. Because if someone were to tell me that like when I first created my first piece of content that this is where I would be, I would have no idea what the hell you're talking about,
right,
and how I even got here, right? And like it just happens, but it only happens if you actually have action.
Yes. Yeah. Great words of advice. So funny. Jeremy Lee said the same thing. He's like, you just got to start. Just start is the hardest thing to do. So totally agree with you there, 100%. All right. Again, thank you for your time. I just wanted to finish as we do with all our guests, some kind of rapid fire questions. And I always like to start with this one because I'm genuinely interested. What's your favorite card you currently own?
That's a great question. I am going to go ahead and say I picked up a Bowman's Best Atomic Refractor of Allen Iverson. And he's my favorite basketball player of all time. Recently picked it up at the Bay Area Card Show, which is wild actually. And I think that's my favorite card. It's beautiful. Normally copies have like greening and stuff of that nature. I'm a big Atomics guy, so like Atomics are my favorite parallel ever.
Yeah.
And so it just hits me in my feels.
Nice. And you're up in the 76ers hat right now doing this interview. So nice. Do you have a Grail card you're currently chasing?
I'd love to get my hands on a PSA 10 Ronaldo Mega Cracks one day. But that's probably the Grail for myself.
Makes sense. Yeah. With your Portuguese background. Makes total sense.
I've got a few lower grades, but nothing that high.
Nice. Most interesting guests you spoke to in the hobby, either on your pod or just at card shows?
Oh, that's a tough one, man. I got a lot of good ones.
Or just one of them, I guess, because you do have a lot for sure.
I do, but I'm really trying to like dig deep for this one. I think the Card Carver was one of my favorites, truthfully.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. He was he shared a lot of stories about his collecting journey and like how it kind of translated to art. But some of the coolest stuff he talked about was how a family member of his actually played for, and he might kill me if I get this wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was it might have been the Brooklyn Dodgers. And so like we're talking about like the early 1900s, and like he's been amassing stuff from like his debut, and so like I think he's got a game used uni, and like it's nice. It was just one of the most fascinating conversations because like it's someone who actually has ties to like vintage baseball, and I was like, man, this is like between your art and this story, I'm like, man, I just can't get enough of this conversation.
Yeah, nice, very personal too, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, we have to ask a hockey question. Do you think Ovechkin breaks the all-time goal record, and do you collect any of his rookie cards?
Yeah, I've got. So I'm trying to build out the entire 05-06 set. So yes, I do have. Nice. I have an OB rookie. I do think he breaks it. I think it's probably gonna take him about 3 years to do so, though.
Me too.
Which I mean, if you're accumulating, like you can, there's lots of time.
yeah. That's good advice.
Yeah. I do think though that Austin Matthews breaks his if he can stay healthy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
We said in the pod, Ovechkin's going to retire only when he breaks the record.
He's a stubborn, like he's not going anywhere. You know what I mean? Like that guy will be on. He'll bring a cane out there if he needs to. He'll pull a Jaromir Jagr.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah.
He'll play until he's as old as Jagr. Yeah. And last question, this is kind of anticlimactic because you did talk about him a little bit. I want to get your thoughts on fellow Canadian Kevin O'Leary, aka Mr. Wonderful, potentially coming into the hobby space. I'm sure we both saw the Instagram live of him breaking a box of 2018 National Treasures basketball, which is just $15,000, the Shine 150, of course.
Casually.
Yeah. Your thoughts on Kevin O'Leary, someone like him coming into the hobby space?
I think it's cool. I think, we've seen so many cool people come into the hobby at this point. You know what I mean? Like, we've seen like Drake was ripping boxes.
Right. Yeah.
Like athletes ripping boxes is also like surreal to me. Just being so close, like 1 or 2 degrees of separation away from like NBA players and MLB players. And I mean, now Kevin O'Leary, like, I just think all of this adds to the fact that sports cards are very relevant to the average person. And so like, it's exciting. Yeah, man, nothing surprises me at this point, truthfully. I'm going to be honest with you. Nothing surprises me at this point. Like, we've really reached a stage in like the last 4 years where I feel like I've seen everything. Like, like,
it's amazing.
I feel like it's only a matter of time before like a president starts ripping, or like, I don't know, like,
some head of state. Yeah.
Literally, just some wild stuff. But
it's definitely exciting. Just where we are as a hobby, and I feel like the last couple years we talked about everything kind of settling down, but there's a lot of movement going on in the hobby, so that's exciting for me at least. And
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, Coach Koe, again, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. And, hope to run into you into the Sports Card Expo here in Toronto. That'd be great to catch up.
I'll be there, man. So hit me up. I'll be there for sure. And I'm excited. We've already announced some great guests. Rob Van Dam's going to be there. Dennis Rodman got announced yesterday.
Nice.
There's like Leaf legends like Felix Potvin and Thomas Caberlet. Teemu Solani's coming.
Amazing.
So if you're not coming there just for the athletes, the show itself is going to be bigger and better than it ever has. So it's going to be good.
Can't wait. Just a month away now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Love it.
All right,
Thanks for having me.